So then pulsing for others, that how do we begin doing this and what is the process? So it begins with, again, the diagnostic question: do I genuinely feel open to a compassionate connection with this person? If we don't, then we take the U-turn and see what's stirring within us and restoring ourselves to the heartbeat of compassion. Because self-compassion forms the ground on which genuine compassion for another can be cultivated. We can't compel it. Our bodies need authenticity to be able to engage other people effectively. And once we've restored ourselves to compassion, then we cultivate compassion for others in the same way that we cultivate it for ourselves. So we connect with the pulse of their humanity. And so that makes the process a little bit easier. So it's the same thing we do for ourselves is what we do for other people. So we begin by paying attention. So when we pay attention, we just simply notice non-reactively, non-judgmentally, what others are doing and what they look like while they are doing it. So we notice their behaviors, their emotions, their words, and their bodily expressions. And we attempt to see them in the truth of their experiences, unfiltered by the lenses of our own reactivity and our own agendas. So we trust, when we're paying attention contemplatively, that everything that they do or feel has a reason and makes sense given the past that they have known. Had we experienced the same conditions in the same context of their lives, we would respond in the same way. And then we move to understanding empathically, that the suffering hidden underneath their actions and emotions. We cultivate empathic understanding through listening deeply to others' experiences until the sources of their behavior surface. So we can surface these sources by engaging flag. So what is the flag straining to be heard within the cry of their actions? So what is the fear? What do they seem to most deeply fear? What is at stake causing them to feel or behave in this way? And then what is the longing there? So for what do they most deeply long? What essential needs for the flourishing of their lives do they seem to be straining for? Aching wounds. So what pains or oppression from their past can you imagine is raw and sensitive now, perhaps triggered even in this very moment? And then the gifts obstructed. What strengths and capacities buried within them seem stifled and discouraged, pleading to be claimed and nurtured? And so the goal of understanding empathically is to soften our hearts so that we become more open to compassionately connecting with their humanity. And when we hear the sources of the cries within others, something shifts inside of us. We are more open, our hearts are open a bit wider, and compassion for them rises within us. And so I saw a question coming up that I thought was actually a really good question. So how can I view anything unfiltered by my own experience? And so I'd like to actually come back to that question. I think it's important. I just want to name that this is important and to come back, we'll come back to it later. So then we move to loving with connection. Understanding the deeper cry of another's flag has the capacity to open a loving connection within us. So like the parent who lingers at a bedroom doorway to gaze upon a sleeping child, compassion deepens as we pause to extend loving care and understanding. And Frank Rogers likes to use a lot of parenting metaphors. And I have been on both sides of being a parent in my engagement with the compassion practice. And so when I first learned this and first encountered this metaphor, I got it, intellectually and kind of understood what he was going for. And then I became a parent and actually did what he's talking about here and realized I didn't really get it, that I got this in a fundamentally new way. And so I'm really seeking new ways to express loving with connection, but that same kind of connection that you feel for a child or an ancestor or a relative or a pet or something like that, where just loving with connection flows naturally and comes easily. That if we can imagine extending that kind of connection to everyone that we meet, to people that we even view as difficult, that this is actually possible. and more difficult in contexts where we're more triggered, but that this kind of loving with connection is profound. And that this gives way to sensing the interconnectedness or the sacredness or the spiritual expansiveness, however we decide to name this. That sensing the presence of infinite compassion, sensing God's presence, and extending it toward the person we are beholding, recognizes and honors our shared mutual self-worth and humanizes them. So crucially in this step, the humanity of all parties is fully recognized, that we are all fundamentally interconnected. So remembering the story that I shared about astronauts on the moon, looking at the world and understanding that we're all interconnected. It all happens there. This kind of interconnectedness and expansiveness is fundamental to cultivating compassion and practicing anti-racism. And then it moves to embodying new life. So as compassion deepens, so does our desire to see others embodying new life. And we commit our intention to nurture such life into being. Our pulses beat strongly when others' deepest desires become our own desires for them. So taking our pulse connects us to our own compassionate core, and taking someone else's pulse connects us to each other and honors our full humanity. Then compassion may flow freely once more.